All right, everybody. Hello. I hope you guys are doing well and welcome on Master Negotiators Debate. I am your host, Jay Raid. I'm an associate professor of management at McGill University, where I teach negotiation and conflict resolution. So, why are we here today? 3 weeks ago, Keld Jensen, and I'll introduce the guest right after, Keld Jensen shared his thoughts on what it takes to be considered a negotiation expert. And it sparked a lively discussion. Andreas Winheller voiced his disagreement, and it seemed to me it was a great opportunity for a master negotiators debate. And so I asked my good friend Moshe Cohen to help us mediate this discussion. And so to everyone in the audience, if you're listening to us, please type in the chat where you're coming from. We want to know who you are, where you're coming from. And so this is the debate that we have today. What makes someone a true expert in negotiation? Is it the years of experience, the depth of knowledge, or perhaps the ability to teach others? So let's dive into the debate. Meet the two debaters. So Andreas Winheller is a negotiation and conflict management expert with a legal background and multiple master's degrees. Andreas is a licensed MBTI master trainer, an NLP trainer, a business mediator. He is also trained in negotiation by Harvard Law School and Kellogg School of Management. Currently, he helps major organizations improve negotiation and team dynamics. He has published multiple books on communication and mediation. Hello, Andreas. Did I miss anything?
No, that's great. And thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you so much for taking time for us. Keld Jensen is a negotiation strategist, author, and speaker with over 3 decades in international management. Keld has published 25 books on negotiation, trust, behavioral economics, and impression management, reaching millions of readers in 36 countries. He is ranked among the global gurus top 30 in negotiation and has received multiple honors for his contributions to the field. He teaches at leading executive MBA school worldwide and regularly speaks at conference and events. Keld, thank you so much for making time for us. Did I miss anything?
You probably did, but it's not important. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And so my co-host today is Moshe Cohen, who is a mediation and negotiation expert. He teaches mediation and he teaches negotiation at Boston University. Thank you so much, Moshe, for helping me out. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So, it's funny because I always get a little bit confused when people introduce me as a negotiation expert, because I think of myself as a student of negotiations more than an expert in it, because I keep learning. And every time that I either negotiate or teach others, I find myself learning something about myself, about human behavior, and about the negotiation process through that interaction. And in addition, just because I have to make my plug, so, I also wrote a book on negotiation called Collywobbles, How to Negotiate When Negotiating Makes You Nervous. Thank you. And my main interest in negotiation is the intersection of negotiation and emotion, because it turns out that, knowing skills and strategies is often not enough, because very often our emotions get involved and we have a hard time accessing those skills and strategies in real time. But that's not my purpose for here today. My purpose is actually to help facilitate a conversation between Andreas and Keld, and to really help us understand why this is an interesting topic, what we're hoping to illuminate or learn through this conversation, and see if this conversation can lead to some insights or understandings. By the way, just so you know, from my perspective as a facilitator, I'm not really hoping to reach consensus or agreement between Andreas and Keld, or us for that matter, on what makes for an expert. I think that one of the things that we need to learn how to do more in the world is disagree, but still have productive conversation. So I'm hoping this is a productive conversation no matter which direction it goes in. So to that, I'll turn the floor back to you, Jan.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Moshe, and thank you so much for making time for us. So also we have Keld's book, Negotiation Essentials, that I think came out in November. Great book, very well structured, very practical. And you have a new book coming out in June or August, right, Keld?
August 27th on Wiley, yes.
Okay, perfect. And so maybe I think a good start would be for me to share my screen and then show the post that started all. And so let me just do it this way, probably do it like that. Keld, maybe do you want to explain, what happened? Sorry. Keld, do you want to explain maybe how did you write this post, or why did you write this post? What was the logic?
Well, first and foremost, Moshe, I completely agree with what you said. Who was it the one said a true expert is the one who recognizes what he doesn't know? So that is so true. I was just co-hosting the World Commerce and Contracting Negotiation Week this week, where we had a number of great people, scholars and practitioners coming in and sharing in different sessions. And me supposed to be the expert there, I learned so much and took so much out of it. So I completely agree. That's the first step we have to acknowledge, all of us. We constantly learn, and negotiation is a thing where we constantly learn, and the whole industry is moving on, and we evolve. So that's great. That's the first step. The reason, JN, very quickly, why I did that is because I've actually been, I don't know, frustrated about, I feel simply there's too many people out there who call themselves an expert. Now, I don't have monopoly of describing what an expert is. So my purpose with this one, as I even wrote in the post, was to provoke and get some insights and get some feedback and get some reactions. But the main reason is I'm a little bit, to be very frank, I'm a little bit fed up with the number of people that claim they're an expert, not really only in negotiation, but in life in general. When you're an expert, and again, I don't have monopoly on describing what an expert is, but you have some fact, you have some research, you have some background, you have some accreditation, you had some recommendation from others. There's a whole long list of what you have. And I feel we have a lot of great people in the industry who's really bright and deliver value to the area. But we also have some people that I feel is almost dangerous, might delivering the wrong advice and base their opinions on what they feel is right and wrong. And, there's not a definitely right or wrong way to negotiate. I think we can all agree on that. But there's certainly a kind of qualification before you should be certified to start teaching somebody else. Just to wrap up very quickly, Jay, and I was a judge at the International Negotiation Competition in Rome last year, in June. And I was sitting on a panel judging one negotiation, and I had a colleague from Britain. I'm not going to mention any names, but he was a so-called expert in negotiation as well. And he was horrible. I mean, the advice he gave to the team was completely wrong. Not because I felt it was wrong, it was completely wrong. And I had to go to the management of the competition and ask kindly, that's not something I normally do, to have him removed, because he was telling these poor law students the absolutely wrong thing. And that's really what motivates me, JN, just to raise the bar, raise the awareness, not only for us, but for everybody out there, so they go and listen to the right people, whether that is Andreas or it's me or it's you or it's Moshe or whoever it is. I don't really care. I just want the information from the right people so people don't get the wrong information. That was really the whole purpose of me provoking by launching this one.
Excellent. And so actually two birds, one stone. Jason says there is no right way, but there's definitely wrong ways to negotiate. So Jason is actually organizing an undergraduate competition, a negotiation competition. It's called the National Undergraduate Negotiation Competition. It was organized at Baylor University for a lot of time. And now it's going to be at his university in Phoenix. And so if you are an undergraduate team, you can still register up until Monday. And so just wanted to say, please register if you're interested in a negotiation competition. Okay, so maybe let me turn off my screen share so we have a little bit, no, we're not going to be like that. Let me just try to find, okay. So I have prepared.
Well, you can put on the full screen, Jay. You're a pretty handsome guy.
Yeah, sure. I'm not going to do that. So maybe we can start by each of you, Andreas, Keld, just to tell us what interested you about the field of negotiation and why are you still in it? Maybe Andreas, do you want to go first?
Okay. Well, that was 25 years ago when I started to professionally study negotiation and put it the main area, the main focus for my professional life. And I was coming from some experience that I had in politics. When I was a student, I was engaged in the student representation body in my university. When I was at school, I was the chairman of the school representation organization of my country and stuff like that. So I was coming from politics, and my first interest in negotiation were to be more effective in using negotiation as a way of finding peaceful solutions to bitter conflicts. And I was, in this early days, I was very, very much inspired by the wonderful work of Roger Fisher and Bill Urey, which is not making or increasing profit, but simply increasing the peace level of the world. And I totally agree with the comment that I saw from John O'Farrell, that conflict increases worldwide, and that this means that we have a lot of that it is much necessary to increase the quality of the negotiation processes that we have in the world, and this is exactly what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about that in the practice out there are too many fake news prophets working as negotiation trainers and negotiation advisors, simply giving bad advice and simply are not capable to train really effective and evidence-based ways of negotiating, and that it is highly necessary to professionalize the field and to put more transparency on it. I totally agree with everything that Keld wrote on that goal. And what he said, what he has already said. I think this is a question, not only a question of making a little bit more money, but a question on getting more peaceful societies, countries in a more peaceful world in general.
Excellent. Thank you, Andreas. Moshe?
So, when you asked me to moderate this debate,
right,
I was expecting a lot more disagreement. And we
haven't started yet. They're going to start to disagree. We're building on the agreement.
What I'm hearing actually is that there's a very strong basis of agreement, and there's a common concern for both you, Andreas, and you, Keld, and I think for lots of other people, that there's a lot of bad advice out there, and there are a lot of people proclaiming to be experts and gaining a following or putting themselves in positions where they are advising people, and they're not leading people in a good direction. Right. And I think that what I'm hearing here is a concern that unless we talk about this, people are going to have a hard time distinguishing between good and bad advice and productive and less productive courses of action. So I thought maybe it might be interesting, given that there's a fundamental baseline of agreement, to actually invite the two of you to talk about some of the specific bad, pieces of bad advice or specific bad directions you've seen people go in, without naming names. I don't want to call anybody out in the industry, but some of the things that you hear people saying that cause you concern that maybe there is that fake news or bad advice out there.
And just before, and I think it's great, Moshe. Just before, I just want to make sure Keld has an opportunity to kind of like answer the same question Andreas answered, which is what got you into the field and what keeps you interested about it. And then you can directly go into what you think is some of the bad advice.
Sure. The short version is I was what I call unconsciously incompetent in the world of negotiation. I didn't know I couldn't do it. Unfortunately, I see a lot of executives out there who are in the same position today. So let's go a few steps back. 1998 was the year. I was the head of a technology company, a public technology company in Stockholm, and I thought I was a great negotiator, which I was not. I was terrible. And I hired my former partner, who is unfortunately not among us anymore, Ivar Und, who founded the organization back in 1976 in Stockholm, his philosophy on negotiation. I hired him, and in less than 2 hours, he moved me from being unconsciously incompetent to being consciously incompetent. I realized that I was terrible at negotiation. And that made me realize that I was probably not the only one. There's probably a lot of people out there who just negotiate every single day, but basically have no baseline, have no education. They have a lot of experience. I still meet people, and Andreas, I'm sure you do the same. Moshe, I'm sure you do the same. Jane, I'm sure you do the same. We meet people who come to us and say, well, I got 21 years of experience, so I don't need you to teach me anything. And sometimes it's true, but often I find they don't have 21 years of experience. They have 1 year of experience. They just keep copying 21 times, right? That's not 21 years of experience. So it made me realize, I'll keep it short, Jane, but it made me realize in 1998 that there was a world that was more important than technology. And that was actually helping and involving the world to understand what negotiation really is. And that negotiation is not an art, it's not something we're born into, it's a science, it's something you can learn, like a lot of other sciences. So that made me change. And I often say, I don't have a job, I have a mission. And my mission is really to try and make people, one, aware that negotiation is a very important topic. That's the first step, because there's a lot of people who don't even realize it's something that they need and they negotiate every single day. And the second step is actually then try to educate them. And my mission is really just to try and raise the bar, raise the awareness in general. And it's not about competing against anybody. That's not the point. My point is, because the market is so huge, it's really raising the awareness. If we can all raise the awareness globally for the need and importance of negotiation, we will all have so much business. So there's a need for a lot of us. So that was I'm sorry, that was long, Jane, but I was just trying to explain where I came from.
So, I mean, maybe now we can go with Moshe's question, which is, what are types of things you see that are problematic or bad advice? Am I asking it right, Moshe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Andreas, do you want to begin?
Okay, let me start. And I put what Keld just said. And I can report a very wonderful study that has been done by Professor Ute Herbst from the University of Potsdam near Berlin in Germany. She did a negotiation performance assessment, and she took a group of unexperienced young students, and on the other side, experienced negotiators from the German industry, business to business negotiators with a huge background on experience. Well, of course, the practitioners totally overwhelmed the student group on performance. But the interesting thing is, the second half of the student group got a 1.5 day negotiation training with 3 negotiation simulations. And that was enough to outperform the practitioners after that.
Scary, huh?
1.5 day of training, 3 simulations, and that was enough for unexperienced young students without negotiation experience to outperform a group representative for the German industry. Right. So first of all, let me say, as an expert from the German speaking negotiation world, we have the same problems as you have, but on a much higher level. So we're much more uneducated and have much more fake news spreading here than in the Anglo-Saxon world. But this is disastrous. So the first bad advice is that experience is the key. That's simply bullshit. Yeah. My professor, Lee Thompson from Keld School of Management, and I'm a huge fan of her, she wrote in her book, The Mind and Heart of Negotiator, the bottom line, experience in the absence of feedback is not effective in developing skills. Full stop. Okay, full stop. That's the thing. So anyone who think he is a good negotiator and had not attended a good negotiation training,
you can't know.
Can't know, and most probably is wrong. So this is I would say this is one group of bad advice, and the other huge group is that putting pressure on people and escalating on relationships is helpful in any way to get a good result. In the German-speaking world, we have a lot of negotiation trainers teaching that you have to put pressure as much as possible on the person to get the best price. I think we don't need to explain why this is wrong, because I know that all of us are agree on that. And the third thing is, there are people telling that hostage negotiating is a business negotiation like any other business negotiation, and
Thank you.
this is for sure an under complex analysis of negotiation economics. I would say these three groups are the most dangerous of bad advice groups.
So just to summarize that, just Andreas, I just want to put it out there. One is that, negotiators very often work alone, or we work in settings where we don't get a lot of feedback. And if you remember the Johari window, when you don't have feedback, you develop blind spots. And we can negotiate for a long time, but develop blind spots so we don't really see the shortcomings of what we're doing. And we don't get to learn and develop. The second thing that you said is that there are many negotiators that will teach that in order to be effective, you need to put a lot of pressure on the other party. Now, by the way, I'm going to throw it out there that might not always be bad advice. There are certain settings and certain transactional negotiations where you are negotiating one time, will never see the other person again, and that may be an effective strategy. So I'm going to soften that a little bit and say there may be some circumstances where that might be good advice, but very probably limited circumstances where that's good advice. But people teach that more generally, and that's something you're concerned about. And the third thing is that people try to equate hostage negotiations and business negotiations, and they're fundamentally different. And people don't acknowledge the differences. And we're not saying that you can't learn something from one to the other, right? I can learn something, from fishing, then apply it to bowling, right? But that doesn't mean they're the same.
Just slightly, just on the crisis negotiation thing. I don't want to be misunderstood. Gary Noesner is a close friend of mine, the former chief negotiator of the FBI, who was one of the person who developed that crisis negotiation framework worldwide, and is for sure the most experienced crisis negotiator in the world. And I deliver workshops together with him about what we can learn from crisis negotiation to apply into business negotiation. But Gary Noesner is not saying hostage negotiation is the same or is economically similar. If we use the 3D negotiation framework from Lex and Sabinius, we can easily find where it is different and where not. On the second dimension, the deal structuring dimension, they're totally different things, and you can't learn anything. But on the first dimension, the at the table influencing processes between two humans that try to influence each other and to try to stay self-control during doing that and in the process, we can learn a lot from them. So I would say it depends on what area or what dimension of negotiation we're talking about, whether we can learn. And I think we can and we should learn much more from the crisis negotiators and building bridges between business schools and the crisis negotiations scene. But we should not think, as some experts are trying to tell the world, that crisis negotiation is enough to handle complex business deals. That's simply nonsense.
That's an important distinction. Keld, it sounds like you wanted to get in here as well.
Yes. Again, I don't know whether the whole debate is there, because we all agree mostly here, but I agree with everything I just heard, with the exceptions. I would question a little bit what you said, Mashi, as well, because I do agree with you. There can be negotiation. I'm what I call a commercial negotiator, and Mike is here, and Mike and I are having that debate quite often. What is a commercial negotiator versus a hostage negotiator, which in my world is most of the cases, two different things. But back to what you said. If you have a one-off deal, should you put pressure on the counterpart? Yes, I would not rule that out. We're working what we call a strategy assessment matrix, where we have 4 quadrants really, and you basically identify how important is the counterpart to us and how important are we to the counterpart. Now, you might be in a one-off deal, but both parties are very important to each other. Then it would be, and I'm sorry to be very blunt, but then it's unintelligent to go into a zero-sum positional negotiation. You should still try and be collaborative. If you're in a marketplace where you're not important to the counterpart is not important to you, there are hundreds of suppliers and hundreds of customers. Why waste time on collaboration and generating value? You might be more efficient just working in a very positional approach. But the key here, Mashi, is that I often find negotiators are not even thinking that strategy through. They kind of just fall accidentally into the conference room, and then they accidentally pick an approach, whether that is collaboration or positional, and they haven't been thinking through the market, the strategy, the counterpart, the position, and everything else. So I agree and disagree with what you just said. Yes, I wouldn't rule it out, but on the other hand, you might be well off doing collaborative negotiation, even in a one-off deal. That was the first thing I want to share with you guys. The second thing I want to share with you guys is back to the whole hostage negotiation thing. Now, let's just put some names on it. I am very happy about Chris Voss. And I'm happy about Chris Voss because he's raised the awareness of negotiation in the world more than anybody else, period, which is a good thing for the industry. Having said that, I disagree with a lot of the stuff he's saying. And I see way too many businesses that acquire his services because they believe that what he is preaching can be used directly in business. Now, that is not Chris Voss's fault. I admire him and his book and everything he's been doing. But there's a pop culture around the world where we sometimes prefer the easy but wrong way instead of the complicated and the right way. And Hollywood is part of that because we all know Hollywood. They like to make things easy and commercialized, and people are sitting there watching a movie and feel that hostage negotiation is cool. But that has nothing to do with real life negotiation. I'm often joking with Mike that, could you imagine, Mike, somebody calls us and said, Mike and Keld, there's a hostage thing going on the building next to yours. Could you come and help us out? I would be saying, don't call me. I would have no freaking clue what to do. Call somebody else. But if somebody's sitting in a contract negotiation, I can certainly show up and help everybody out. So back to what I started off saying, I think there's too many right now, to be very direct, retired law and officers coming into the industry with learn something from them. Absolutely. And I admire hostage negotiation. I mean, I think it's you, Mike, saying it's the highest level of negotiation because you're negotiation life. And I mean, that is something I admire. But making that comparable to a commercial negotiation. The last thing I want to say, Mashi, is when we are negotiating, sitting in a commercial negotiation, there's really only one reason why two organizations are negotiating with each other. That is to generate value and distribute value. Generate value, distribute value. Otherwise, they wouldn't negotiate with each other at all. So commercial negotiation is a mathematical exercise where we have to figure out how to make 2 + 2 = 7. And I don't know how you do that in any hostage case whatsoever. So yeah, anyway, that was my 2 cents on the whole thing.
So what's interesting to hear you say, and I think, again, I agree with you. We all fundamentally agree. Everybody on this call fundamentally agrees about more than we disagree. Is that the real situation is more complex and nuanced. That there's no, oh, look at the following 3 parameters, and yes, I'm going to go in positional, or no, I'm going to go in collab. That, and in fact, when I teach, I very often tell people that this whole distinction between collaborative and competitive is artificial because many negotiations contain both collaborative and competitive elements.
Yes.
Right. So you use both skill sets, right, and that we need to make thoughtful and deliberate decisions. But the other thing you point out is that people don't like complexity. People want simple answers to things that are often very complicated, and they're very much attracted. And I think this gets us back to our original point of this conversation. People are attracted to those experts that give them a simple solution. People are, if someone says to them, do X, Y, Z, and you'll get the result you want, and it seems like something that they can do and do simply, then they're attracted to that. And in a certain percentage of the cases, it will help them. But the problem is that in many cases, it actually won't. And they're not taking that more thoughtful, more holistic approach to say, okay, what is going on here? What am I looking to do? What is the other person looking to do? What's the opportunity? What are the risks? One of the things that people don't talk about when it comes to hostage negotiations, for example, is that you're negotiating with people who have terrible alternatives, right? If you're a hostage taker, your alternatives are usually pretty bad. And when you're negotiating with people who have bad alternatives, that gives you a certain amount of power that you don't have when you're negotiating, let's say, with a vendor that can look at 3 other fairly equivalent suppliers.
Right. That's the main difference. I also really like the book from Chris Voss, and I think what I love is that he has brought our focus on the importance of empathy and the importance of creating bonding. And this is the same in business negotiations. And we see it so much. I've been in Harvard, I've been in Kellogg, I've been in so many negotiation institutions all over the world. And it was always a very rational, very logical environment from highly intellectual academic people. Richard Thaler, in his when he got the Nobel Prize, he did his lecture the day before, and it is that and he said that wonderful sentence, and it is, real people are less like Commander Spock and more like Homer Simpson. And for me, this is one of the most important messages when I teach negotiation that I try to teach. Because this is the missing link in the approach that we teach a lot in business schools and in negotiation approaches coming from business schools. And Chris Voss was the first to step out and say, hey, that's not the whole thing. And if you do that logical thing, but totally ignoring the emotional side of negotiation, you will not be successful, and you will not be successful in business negotiations as well, because the influencing game, which is a part of any human interaction, the influencing game is the same, but it is not on making compromises. It's for sure. It's not, you have 4 hostages, give me 2, you can kill the other. And so yeah, it is not like that. And that's the difference between hostage negotiation and commercial negotiation. But
Can
I
step in for a moment, Andreas? And I think you're making good points. One concern I have about this conversation is it's getting too much focused on hostage negotiation and on Chris. I like Chris. I know Chris, and he's certainly made huge contributions to the field. I think that we want to talk more generally about, aside from hostage negotiation and this idea that all these experts are retiring from law enforcement and teaching what they did in hostage negotiations as experts. I'm wondering what other concerns we can talk about, because I think that we run the danger of focusing too much on that one area and neglecting some of the others. Keld.
Okay. Sure. I absolutely agree with you. It's not about that one area. And again, I just want to repeat, I think it's amazing what Chris Voss has done for the industry. So I'm very grateful for that. What I'm really talking about in general, about his book, anybody else's book, is I've seen too many who buy one book, and it doesn't have to be Chris's book, it could be any book, read that book and think they're qualified and educated. It's not enough. You have to read a range of books. It's not, you can't buy my book either and feel that you learn about negotiation. It's not enough. You have to buy and read a bunch of other books. And what I really meant with that Hollywood pop culture is I've seen too many people who buy one book. It could be getting to Yes or Chris Voss or whatever and saying, I read it. It's the best book ever. I now know how to negotiate. And I'm often thinking, how the F, and I apologize my language, do you know that if you haven't read any other books? How do you know this was the best ever? Because yes, there are things you can pick from that book, things you can pick from another book, things you can pick from this book. but you have to have a selection. You have to compare. And you have to figure out yourself what is useful in this book compared to this book. And then the last thing I want to say is, and I often use the quote, and we're both authors here. We're several authors on this call. And I always say, you can't learn to swim by reading a book. And what I mean by that, back to your example, Andreas, with the simulations, you can buy how many books you ever want to do, read all of them, and basically I've learned nothing. You have to practice. You have to take the training. You have to do the simulations. And I love the example, Andreas, you had, because I see it every single week with students and clients of mine. You can lecture and talk and lecture, but before they have tried it out themselves, lights on, but nobody's home. It doesn't move anything. So it's cool that these books are selling millions and millions and doing really well. And I'm happy when my book is selling. But it's not enough. So it's really an important message that we all share that, buy more books, read more books, and then take the training. It's not enough. So I agree. It's not about hostage negotiation or whether it's a good or bad book. I'm talking about raising awareness, what is needed. That's the key thing here.
Yeah, but maybe I agree on that. But maybe it's time to start with a little bit, things we maybe not.
Yeah.
All of us, and which were the reason why we come together and have that conversation. And let me come back to the post that Keld did. We already agreed on that we have the same goal, that we need some sort of transparency and some sort of more professionalism in the industry. But I have a totally different idea on what strategy might be helpful to going there. From my perspective, I see just two groups. The one group, these are the people who are not capable to help people to develop effective negotiation skills. And then we have the other group who are capable of doing that, who are effective negotiation trainers. And I think it is not helpful to divide the group of the effective negotiation trainers on discussing whether being a professor is better than being not a professor, whether you have to be an author or it is enough just to read books that other people have wrote, whether you have to be a TED speaker or not a TED speaker, whether you have an agency or not an agency. I think we divide in groups, and it is not on that. It is, are you educated in helping and experienced, both from my perspective is important, to help people develop effective negotiation skills. And I think you don't have to be a professor. You don't have to be an author of a book. You don't have to teach at the university. You don't have to be a speaker. You don't have to offer online training. And a lot of these criteria are not necessary to qualify as a very effective negotiation trainer. And this is what I would like to call an expert. So I think to put a 15, 18, I didn't count it, criteria list is bringing some more of, it's raising discussion whether Keld Jensen is the better expert than me or Moshe or else. And this is not helpful, totally not helpful to reach our goal, because I think any one of us four is able to create a effective negotiation training. So we are not the problem, but we should focus on how we can really detect people who are not able to do that. And I think this criteria list is much too complex. And yes, it comes to that you qualify to each one of these criteria. But this is from my perspective, and that was my objection when I came with my critics. And I'm a stereotype German, very open and sometimes rude. But but we stick to the point, right? Because we come to the point to address the real concerns. And this is, and that was my thing, that the Keld Jensen marketing interfered with what is, from my perspective, quite important, not to divide the people who are standing for professional, to do a professional negotiation training on this world and in all the country. We should better unite and stand against the others. That's my point of view.
So Andreas, let me just take 2 points from what you said. Right. The first one, actually, I think is something that we substantially agree on. That there's a distinction, and Mike Inman made that point before, about what are we talking about when we're talking about expert? Is it someone who does or someone who teaches? And it sounds like that the focus of the conversation here is more on someone who teaches, right? Because different people might be effective experts in their particular negotiations, and that's not really what we're debating here. What we're debating is the people who purport to be experts in helping others become better negotiators. And this is the second point that you bring up, Andreas, and this is the point where you had a concern about what Keld had written, is that Keld's list of criteria as for what makes an expert is unnecessarily narrow, is one that might exclude people who are potentially very effective negotiation teachers, but don't necessarily meet those criteria. And with a smile, you said that if you look at those criteria, they describe Keld pretty well, and that that's great, and that good negotiation teachers shouldn't be limited to ones that are similar to Keld.
So quick question, just a clarification question. And so excellent point, Moshe. When I read this, you posted it twice, right, Keld? You posted it a few months ago and then you reposted it. I remember seeing it both times, but understanding it as these are some things that could be used as criteria to determine if somebody is a negotiation expert. But now I'm wondering if maybe Andreas sees it as like an exhaustive list where you have to meet all of the criteria. So I thought maybe we could have a little bit of a discussion. If you guys could say, maybe Keld, should we have to meet all of the criteria, or is it just some examples?
No, I want to say two things, and getting back to what I started off saying, my purpose of doing it was really to provoke, and I was successful in doing that. That's one thing. The other thing is, as you read on the top, it says qualifications to consider in choosing a negotiation trainer advisor. I'm not saying this is the list. I'm sure if you ask back to, I'm sorry to repeat, Chris Voss, he would probably put in that you have to be a hostage negotiator to qualify. I don't qualify for that, and there's a bunch of things I wouldn't qualify for than Andreas probably would. So everybody's welcome, obviously, to publicize what they feel is a requirement to be a expert in negotiation. I had a very close friend of mine who is the head of negotiation at a major American consultancy company, who actually emailed me and said, I don't qualify for any of these stuff. And he's an excellent negotiator. I would call him an expert every single day. So sure, you can qualify to be an expert and not fulfilling all these items you have on the list. I would absolutely agree with that. What I'm just looking for is, back to what Andreas said, we have to find a way to qualify people and disqualify people. Because what I start saying, JN, is we have people that are disqualified to be in this industry. And they may be good at creating a name about themselves, but they shouldn't be able to do it. A lot of industries have certifications. You have to be certified to be allowed to start doing something. In this industry, anybody can just go out there and claim to be a negotiation expert. So perhaps we should start off saying, what is an expert? When are you an expert in this field? When are you considered a guru in this field? And then start from that point. Because I just see organizations make terrible choices in picking a trainer in something. And again, back to what I said, it's not a question of picking me or my organizations or my partners. Obviously, I would love that. But they can go with anybody else. They can pick Andreas, they can pick Moshe, they can pick you, Jan. I don't really care, but pick somebody who's qualified, for God's sake, and not all that smoke and mirror that I see that is in the industry all the time. So just to wrap up, yes, that list is a provocation. I mean, seriously, some of the items I do feel is important, because if you have some of these things, somebody else have evaluated you. Somebody else have found you either too light or too heavy. Somebody else have identified that you are good enough to do something. And I think I actually saw one of the answers to my post, and one of them was, I don't remember the exact content, but it was, you're a true expert when somebody else calls you an expert. And I guess that's right, because if you call yourself an expert, that's just your opinion about it, right? It really have to be somebody else who's qualified to qualify you as a negotiator who should call you that. So if you have been certified, if you've been awarded, if you've been something from somebody else, whether it's a publisher, a university, or you got awards or whatever, perhaps you're getting closer considered being an expert. But if you're not fulfilling any of these items, whatever that might be, well, perhaps you are an expert, but perhaps you're not. Who knows?
So Keld, I think the main point of your list, aside from to provoke a conversation, which you've been successful, we're having the conversation, was to forget the specific items on that list initially, is to say, should we be asking questions about what makes this supposed expert an expert?
Absolutely.
Or should we just take them at their word that they are experts and therefore hire them?
Right.
So the second thing is that, you do have some feelings about some of those items on the list, and you have some concerns that really there's no qualification in this field, right? Anybody can call themselves an expert. Anybody can start teaching. I got to tell you, I started teaching negotiation back in 1996, and I was terrible. Like, I'm embarrassed about what I was teaching back then.
Yes.
But fortunately,
So
I
was I.
learn as I go along.
It means you've
Right?
grown, right?
So I don't think I'm terrible anymore. And and I don't think I would have lasted this long if I were terrible, and if I stayed terrible. But so there is very little standardization. I don't know if certification is necessarily the way to go. I've seen lots of other industries where people certify and they're still not that great. So certification is a tricky thing, because then you look at what are the certification criteria. How do you come up with meaningful criteria? How do you translate between the certification criteria and the actual performance when people are actually working with people? I'll just make one more comment, and then I'll go to you, Andreas, because it sounds like you want to add to this.
Yeah.
We are not teaching robots. I'm a former roboticist, and robots are kind of fun. You program them, and they pretty much do what you tell them to do. We're teaching humans. And when we teach humans, we need to be very much aware that what we do effectively may not work for them, that who they are, might need to be effective in a completely different way to us. And one of the problems I see with supposed experts is that they can only teach people to do what they do. They say, I'm the expert. Here's what I've done for 20 years. Do what I do and you'll be successful. But that is a complete disconnect between between them and the people they're working with. And part of being an expert is developing the ability to understand what the other person is doing, to understand what their skills and limitations and emotional makeup are, and then to deliver them the ability to become effective in their way, not in our way. And that's part of what I see missing among the experts.
Yeah.
Andreas, to you.
Yeah. I just like to add three thoughts to what you and Keld did just say. First of all, I think expert is a qualification of a role. So we should not speak on an expert alone. We should add the role. So I see negotiation trainer experts, negotiation speaker experts, negotiation advisor experts, negotiation experts. I think Mike Inman is totally true. I know a lot of trainers who are great trainers, but maybe not the best negotiators. So it depends on the role. First of all, an expert is a qualification that you're very good in that role. So and first of all, we should understand that each role needs its own skill set and its own education. when you claim to be an expert in negotiation training, you should have been educated in how to assist individual personalized learning processes, and not just delivering your speech and say, do whatever you want with it. No, it is your obligation to work in a way that you assist the individual learning process. That's the first thing I just want to mention. The second thing, I agree there is a science on negotiation, but I prefer, in my work, I prefer to use the metaphor that negotiation is a craft. And if you say negotiation is a craft, and we have, as you may know, in Germany, we have a system where we have a very formalized education for several and craftsmanship and so if you say it is a craft, you mean you have to have learned it by a master.
Yeah.
And you are not a master unless you have learned it by several masters. You have to traditionally you go on travel over years. You go on travel from master to master to master, learn their specific perspective on the process and on what we're doing, and then you try to integrate what you've learned in your own specific way. But if you're a master of a craft, you're never finished with learning. It's a life of looking for new procedures, new techniques, new developments in your field if you're a real master. And it comes on whether you're able to teach young people about your craft and about your perspective of the craft, and be able to develop that. The third thing I just want to add is, unfortunately, and there is a huge difference between some crafts and negotiation. If you hire a plumber and he puts a toilet in your flat and it does not work properly, then you see that he didn't do his job properly. So okay, this guy is not that good. Unfortunately, unless we are really expert negotiators, we don't have a good awareness on how good we are negotiating and about how good our negotiation results are. And since most companies on the world does not have a really effective and professional negotiation controlling system, even the companies doesn't be aware of that. So you can be a negotiator, negotiating for 20 years, being really mediocre, but feel you're great. Because this is the problem. Again, Lee Thompson, she said, it is a counterintuitive process. It's a counterintuitive process. So this is why we have this study showing that 2/3 of the negotiators are thinking that they are one of the best third of negotiators. So that means every second is wrong in the assessment of his own of his own performance, and that's why you need a good negotiation training to find out whether your negotiation trainers that you did hire the last 20 years were fools or not. That's the, from my perspective, that's the main problem in the field. Why professionalism is such a hard task. Why? Because good marketing and being a good speaker and making nice jokes and being kind to person and telling some basic ideas could be enough to create that false idea of being competent.
So Andreas, a few things. One, I like the distinction that when we talk about expert, we need to be, clear about expert in which role, expert in which aspect of what we're talking about, because they're not necessarily the same skills. The second thing is, and I think it resonated, this idea of negotiation being a craft. Again, I'm a former scientist. My undergraduate was in physics, and then I did a master's in engineering. Negotiation isn't like that. There is no right answer, right? And there is no formula that we can apply. So in that sense, Keld, you said that before that negotiation is a science, and there are aspects of it that are, but thinking of it as a craft will maybe incorporate that idea of a science, but add some things to it that come with experience, come with practice, come with having good teachers, coming with from having taught others. And the third thing is, and I really like this point, and I think both of you brought this up. In negotiation, unlike in other areas, it's often hard to measure how well we did. The results aren't necessarily visible. So for example, if I'm a very competitive, hard-nosed negotiator, I might have secured a great price, but destroyed a relationship and damaged the value that I could get in the next negotiation, because now they won't do business with me anymore. So there are things that we don't see that make it very, very hard to measure how well we do. And that's why we keep doing things that aren't so great and never really know. And that it's also hard to tell how well we teach. And that very often the people that we're teaching, negotiation training is fun. I don't think any of us will argue about that. Almost everyone who's gone through a negotiation training has enjoyed it. It's just a fun thing to learn. They get a sugar high from the day. The question that I often come up with is, okay, now that day is over, what are they still doing a month from now that is actually impacting their success in some way, or however they want to measure it? So it's hard to measure how we did. It's hard to measure how well we taught, and that squishiness of it that makes it very difficult to assess, makes it hard to identify who's really providing expertise and help and who isn't. Keld, it sounds like you want to jump in there.
Yes, as usual, I love most of what you said. I would challenge one thing that you mentioned, and that was the thing about making it. It's hard to measure. Again, I have to repeat. I'm a commercial negotiator. The reason I work with a client or student is to make it measurable. I saw Mike in the comments was saying, well, his client is buying him again because of the return on investment. I completely agree with Mike on that when we're talking commercial negotiation. We have an approach that we have labeled negotiation economics, which is very simple. It's the asymmetric value between the two parties. And it's often unrealized hidden value that most organizations are aware of. They don't negotiate in transparency. They don't have trust in each other. So that's why they leave value on the table. That value is very easy to calculate. That value is very easy for the parties to identify. So in commercial negotiation, and I'm sorry to repeat myself, you negotiate to identify, create value, and distribute that value. So it's about a monetary value. And that is why people like Mike get rehired. And that is why my organization get rehired, because an organization can see it makes an impact. There is an increase in earnings. I don't call myself, as I said earlier, a hostage negotiation expert. For sure, I'm not. I'm maybe not even a good conflict negotiation expert handling a disagreement. I may not be a good facilitator. But my area, back to what you said, Andreas, about qualifying people in a box, what they're good at as a negotiator. Again, I agree with you. I'm sorry we agree so much today, but I agree with you on that one because it's so true. And it's really down to what area and segment you are working on. And I would challenge negotiation experts who are saying, I can cover it all. I can deal with a conflict. I can deal with a disagreement. I can deal with a commercial negotiation, because in the world of commercial negotiations, it's really a mathematical exercise that is married with a lot of techniques and tools. How do you actually create that value? Because that's the reason we're doing it. So anyway, that was a long story, Moshe, just to challenge the thing that it's hard to measure. Sometimes, yes, it's hard to measure. Outside the commercial conference room, it can be very hard, if not impossible, to measure. But a commercial negotiation, you can actually often put the outcome in a spreadsheet saying that was what the parties achieved. Now, can you compare to what they would have achieved if you were not there and you didn't do it? That's really hard. But you can actually measure what it is that Mike is doing and what it is we are doing quite often.
So I will hit the ball right back to you, Keld, and say I agree with most of what you said. And so first of all, yes, there is a lot that can be measured, but anything on the spreadsheet is a model. It's a simplification.
Yeah.
And there are things that the spreadsheet doesn't capture. And those might be some of the things that might be more difficult to measure. So questions like, will I want to do business with this person again? Will they be my first phone call or my fifth phone call when I come to make the next deal?
Yeah.
Are there intangibles in this deal that could provide benefit to both of us that aren't captured in the numbers? Are there ways where we can both benefit by creating a market that didn't exist before, where there's nothing in our model, nothing in our spreadsheet to even indicate that that model exists. Sorry, that value exists. So you're absolutely right. I mean, if you know what you're trying to achieve, you can look at measures of how well did we do versus those parameters. Where I push back is that those parameters are generally not complete. There's always some missing pieces to it, and I'm sure you'll agree with that. There's nothing I'm saying that's controversial, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If I could just answer that one, I completely agree. Again, yes, there's a lot of other stuff going on in negotiation, but the numbers. But I would say all the other stuff are the requirements to achieve the best possible financial outcome. I wrote a book a few years ago called The Trust Factor. One of my key focus areas in negotiation is the need to create trust, to create transparency, to build up a relationship. I'm a strong believer in collaborative negotiation. Every study on earth shows that that will give you more financial benefit. There's a number of tools and requirements to do that. So it's definitely important to focus on all of that. Back to what I said though, since I'm a very commercial negotiator, what interests most organizations is the bottom line, whether we like it or not. They're interested in increased earnings and the benefit. Now, what is great that I can prove, and I'm sure we can all around this table here today prove, is that when you conduct your negotiation right, when you create a relationship, when you have created an increased trust, when you create transparency, you also come out of that negotiation financially stronger than if you've been negotiating an absolutely positional negotiation. So there's a lot of requirement that leads to that financial success. But what I'm just saying as a commercial negotiator, what interests the organization is actually, and let's just be quite frank, is actually not so much all what they would call the softies, but the bottom line. But when they realize that that is needed to improve the bottom line, then they start paying attention. I often start my lectures, Moshe, by the way, by saying we're not going to talk about negotiation whatsoever. We're going to talk about success. How can you become more successful, but not at the expense of the counterpart? And why is it in your interest to help the counterpart becoming more successful, but not at your expense? Then people are really confused. But you know, that's often how we embrace negotiation.
Yeah.
You know,
and this is why, and this is why I said that that it is not possible to get a real good understanding of how good your result is, as long as you are not good educated, and as long as your company does not have a negotiation controlling system or negotiation management system. And I agree that there are criteria where you can measure success in a way, but let me add, I don't like the term. It's commercial negotiation is just mathematics. I don't think that this is right or that this is the truth in real negotiations, as long as we have not this full open truthful exchange atmosphere that Howard Reifer was analyzing, and in most real work commercial negotiations, we don't have that full open truthful exchange system where you could be assured that it is. We have this negotiator's dilemma, this information's dilemma problem. And that means that you can have an understanding whether you get some return on invest for negotiation training that you're doing as a company, but and you can get an idea on whether you do quite good results, but you could not be aware of how good your negotiation result really is, how good you are in claiming the potential and creating the potential for value creation, and you need a laboratory training where you have this transparency after the negotiation to just get a real assessment on how good you were. And this is why I always saying, if someone is telling me that he didn't have a negotiation training in his life, I'm saying he's not an expert negotiator at all. I'm sure, because it is necessary and not possible to become one without these objective feedback processes.
Sorry, I just want to add one thing, Andreas. I had a funny experience a couple of weeks ago. I met a gentleman who said, "Oh, I agree with you. Negotiation training is very important. I had great trainings 18 years ago. I still remember that course. It was really good." And I was actually sitting there. Well, on the upside, he had training. On the downside, it was 18 years ago. And, it's not enough either just to have training one time in your life. It's actually something you need to repeat a few times because, things changes. So I would agree with you completely. You definitely need training. And I still, just getting back to your study, I love that study. I would love to see it. I didn't know of it, the one with the students and the experienced negotiators. It's very interesting.
Yeah. So
the situation, Keld, is we have a study from last year showing that 50% of the negotiators in the industry in the German-speaking countries doesn't have a single negotiation training in their entire life. 50%, not a single one. So I agree with where we regularly would be better. Let's start to spread the idea that you should have a basic one. That is a huge increase on professionalism.
We had a similar study in the US, Andreas, that showed that 55%, I repeat, 55% of professional, you could always ask, is that professional? But professional contract negotiators had never received training either. So that's 50, if the study is true, 55% of those who are sitting every single day negotiating huge contracts have no formal training. I didn't sleep that night when I saw that study.
So I'm going to give you an even more shocking statistic. 100% of 3-year-olds have never taken a negotiation training, and yet they are marvelous negotiators.
Right. So Keld, actually, are they though? Keld was giving an example of his 2 kids when he was on the podcast. Do you want to give it, Keld?
Yeah, well, I got so many. I got 2 boys who are 4 and 7. So I can tell you, Marsha, we have nothing but negotiation going on all day. Now, are they negotiating all the time? Are they good negotiators? I would question that. Now, they do reach their purpose once in a while, but that's because the parents are giving in. But it's definitely, there's a lot of gambits going on. There's a lot of serious sum negotiation going on. And there's a lot of what I would say, how can I put it nicely? Manipulating behavior in that negotiation. So
absolutely. I have my daughter in my book as an example for really good influencing techniques, and she's world class in that. She's the best. She's the best fit to me. She's my kryptonite. But on the other hand, I doubt whether she will be able to structure some commercial deal for Fortune 500 company. I'm not sure whether she's a really good negotiator. I totally agree. She is. If it compared, it's a little bit like the crisis negotiation thing we already discussed. Just one dimension, the influencing dimension, the human interaction dimension, and yes, they're good at that. But the deal structuring and all the complex process structuring aspects, I'm not quite sure.
So I want to put to you that we're all in agreement that everybody in the world should go through a negotiation training. Some on the call might see that as somewhat self-serving on our parts, since we provide those trainings. And yet I think there's value there, and especially for people who engage routinely in negotiations and negotiations that matter to them and to their organizations. Many of the people that I interact with negotiate, and I just want to shift this just to hear your perspective. They negotiate more internally. They don't have outside facing negotiations with vendors, clients, business partners, but they might be in information technology, negotiating deadlines with different people in their companies. They might be, in project management, negotiating, because, project management involves a lot of negotiation because you have responsibility, but no authority over the people on your projects. And they're negotiating for people's time and attention and for them to deliver results. And I'm just curious, and I want to hear a little bit from each of you about what expert negotiation means in that context.
It's a very, very important topic you're raising, because people sometimes forget that internal negotiation takes an enormous amount of our time. And when I ask a lot of my clients, they often say that internal negotiation is so much tougher than the external ones, right? It's harder to reach an agreement. And one of the reasons is obviously you're basically negotiating often with somebody who got monopoly, because you can't replace your manager, you can't replace the production manager. You have to reach an agreement with that individual. I often work with procurement, and what I'm challenging them to do is actually challenging their internal clients. Let's say that you have a procurement officer and somebody internally comes to him and say, we have to change delivery time from our suppliers from 6 weeks to 3 weeks. And I'm challenging that procurement officer, saying, do you just accept that and then go out to the supplier and say, no, we need to have reduced delivery time? And often they say, yes, that's what I do. And I say, why? Do we know the value or the cost for us to ask for a shorter delivery time? And often they go, no, it will just be nice to have. And then my next question is, do we know what the cost is to the counterpart? Because if the supplier's cost of reducing that delivery is higher than your benefit, then it's absolutely stupid to ask for something like that. And that requires internal negotiation. So I'm often saying that negotiation is a management strategy. You have to start at the top, water run downwards, right? So top management have to understand the impact of requesting something in negotiation. There was a major American company. It could be any company, big company in the world. I think they're all done it.
Oh, I think we may have lost Keld.
We've lost Keld, for a second. We'll see if he comes back.
We want an additional 50%.
Oh, Keld, can you repeat what you just said? Because your screen froze for like 20 seconds.
Am I back? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. Anyway, sorry, I was just saying, I got one of these letters I'm sure we all have seen, where a major corporation is sending out this, what I call a threatening letter to a supplier. So what this letter was saying is that from this date, we expect you to reduce your price by 15% and increase your line of credit with an additional 60 days. Kind regards, company. And I'm just wondering, if you're sitting in procurement as a negotiator, do you feel okay sending out that letter? And if you don't, well, then you should challenge that internally and having that internal negotiation. The last thing I want to say, Mashi, that is, I'm basically telling my clients that the golden rule that is repeated in every big religion in the world: only do to others what you like others to do to you. So if you're sitting in procurement, if you wouldn't like the counterpart to do to you what you're asking them to do, should you do it? And if you don't want to do it, then I'm actually provoking now. Then I'm saying, then you're a prostitute, because then you're just doing it because of your salary. If you disagree, then you have to challenge and negotiate internally. Anyway, that was a long lecture. I just got inspired because you talked about the internal negotiation, which sometimes is so much more important than the external negotiation. And people forget that. So it's a great topic you just put on the table.
Absolutely. And if I may add that from my experience, I very like a simulation that I use very often in my trainings. It's a simulation from DRRC at Kellogg School of Management. It's called LTEC, and it's an internal negotiation. And the funny thing is that we see, on average, we see the same 30 to 40% loss in value creation that we see if we simulate outside. commercial negotiations. So we burn the same amount of money, regardless we simulate outside negotiations with the foreign companies or internal negotiation within our own company. And that, from my perspective, shows the best that it is simply a lack of technique, of good technique, of good framework, of understanding how to create a good solution. And from my perspective, trust issues shouldn't be that big issue, since it is the same money. If we're negotiating within the same company, it's the company's money. So there's not that huge risk of being exploited. But research and my training experience shows that it is that problem, and this is very helpful to participants in a training to understand the problem, and to understanding how big that problem is, and to find a way to find better solutions. They can start internally because they can trust more internally, and they can learn that it simply pays. That you get a good payment if you implement ideas like that and techniques like that, and then you can start being more showing more courage in your outside negotiations and else. Because again, citing Lee Thompson, negotiation is your key influence process inside and outside the organization. Your key influence process inside and outside the negotiation. Everything you or 90% of what you get, and with how you get your success is through negotiation. In most roles in the company, you negotiate at least as much internally as externally.
So go ahead, Keld, and why don't you respond to that, and then there's something.
I just had a very, very quick story just to add on, Andreas. I just got inspired what you said, that enormous amount of value is lost internally as well. I experienced that. I work as an advisor as well in negotiation. I had a client we were sitting in a negotiation together, and he wrapped up and finished, and I was there as an observer. And I noticed that he could improve the terms of payment a lot, but he didn't. So we walked out to the parking lot, and I approached him and said, I noticed the payment terms, you didn't improve that. Did you just ignore it? Did you forget about it? What happened? And then he said, no. I know we could have done that. I know we could have made a fortune on that. But that is Robert up in finance that will get the benefit of that. I wouldn't, and I don't like that guy. So back to what you said, Andreas, suddenly psychology between a colleague comes in play, right? Because suddenly you have internal competition that I don't want to help that department by improving my negotiation. So I'm not improving that variable because that would help somebody else. So there you go. That's part of the reason that we're losing fortunes. Even though you're saying it's the same money, I would agree. But personal chemistry, psychology, whatever you have going on between people suddenly makes an impact there and makes it very difficult to utilize that value. Scary, but it's
Jay, and you wanted to add something as well.
Right. So I think, so I agree with you. And I know also Lee Thompson, Andreas, and I was asking her a few months ago, why are people so terrible at negotiating? Because, people negotiate all the time, but why don't they get better? And then she said exactly what you said earlier, which is that without feedback, you can't improve. And I think this is really important. The only place in your life where you'll actually get feedback about what your counterpart had in terms of BATNA or goal is in a classroom or in a workshop where you have instructions and you can debrief. If you buy a car, you will never know if it was a good deal or not. You will never know if you destroyed value. You will only know that in a simulation. And because if you accept a job and then you get a 15% increase, you will never know if you could have gotten a 20% increase. And so I think, to me, that's the number one point in the classroom. So you were talking about, they're destroying, this case, I haven't used it, but they're destroying 30% of the value. but they're not aware of it. They're
Yeah.
To them, they've just been inflicting something, and they think, yeah, I sent them this letter and I told them to do XYZ and they did it. But they're not, to them, they won. They don't know that they actually destroyed value. So to me, that's the
Absolutely.
point I wanted to make, which is,
Yeah.
we're not trying to sell something. It's just that you have nowhere else in your life a place where you'll actually get to see what the
Yeah.
constraints were, like nowhere.
And one of the,
Absolutely.
right.
And
And one of the
it's
fun
not
things, go ahead.
speaking.
Go ahead, Andreas.
I just want to say, yeah, absolutely, and it's important to participate in a classroom with simulations. It is not enough to attend a huge speaking session where you can create cognitive knowledge. I know so much people who are able to write books on negotiation, but not able to negotiate well. This is because it's a craft. Cognitive knowledge is not enough when it comes to negotiation. It is simply not enough. Cognitive knowledge is just one thing, but at the end, it is implementing effective behavior in the right situations, especially under stress. So this is where this is, and you just can't create that if you're practicing under transparency simulations, or with some sort of bots. You can edit with training with bots where you can edit afterwards, or things like that. But there's no shortcut. You have to go through this process. I totally agree with you.
So I'd like to conclude with just a couple of thoughts. A lot of times at the beginning of a negotiation workshop, I'll tell people that I think of negotiation very much like swimming, where you can't learn how to swim by seeing a PowerPoint about swimming. You can't learn how to swim by hearing me talk about swimming. You just got to get in the water and swim. And it's not enough to do it on your own. Somebody has to instruct you in it. Somebody has to watch you as you're doing it and gives you course corrections. Sometimes somebody needs to videotape you so you can actually see what you're doing. So without the instruction, without the feedback, without the awareness of what you're doing, and without the practice, right, we can learn about negotiation, but we can't learn to negotiate. The second thing I want to put to you is that even we in this conversation are subject to our own biases, right?
Yeah.
So Keld, you come from a certain commercial negotiation background, and like any human, you're going to see the world through that filter. And Andreas, you come from, a different background where you focus more on conflict resolution, more on, and I'm not saying you don't, there's overlap between all of us, but I'm saying that, your approach is also filtered through your experience. I'm a mediator background. I'm a mediator with a scientific background. I have my own filters that I put on this. One of the things that, and Jan, you have a different background, and all of us see the world through those background, those different filters. And when we look at what makes for an expert, and when we try to categorize for others what makes for an expert, even we need to be careful not to let those own biases and filters determine what we use as criteria for expertise. In mediation, we have a saying that your purpose drives your practice. That if you are thoughtful about what you're trying to achieve, that drives the actions you take and the way you think and the way you interact with other people in order to achieve that purpose. And I think that one of the themes that comes out from all of this conversation that we have is that we need to be more purposeful in what we do as experts, how we think about what other people are doing when we try to determine if they're providing valuable expertise, and that purposefulness is lacking, and that measure of how, and measuring how people are doing, that's also missing. And I really want to thank, first of all of you for for providing some very insightful ideas about how we can be more purposeful and how we can be more effective, both in negotiating and in helping others become more effective negotiators. And that, I want to just turn it over to you, JN, if there's anything that you'd like to add at this point.
No, I mean, I really thank you so much, Keld, Andreas, for taking time and participating in this debate. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Moshe, for mediating it, moderating it. It was extremely useful. Sorry, I have a puppy who's really hard to control. Yeah, she is.
Whoa.
She's 4 months, so she's like really a baby, and she barks a lot. I really want to thank you, everybody from the audience. We had, like around 100 people between the different platforms we've been in, around 70 on LinkedIn and 20 on Twitter and the rest on Facebook. Thank you very much. I want to remind you of the 2 books. Where is Keld's book? Okay, it's here. I want to remind you of the 2 books. Go buy Keld's book, Negotiation Essentials. It's available on Amazon. I will link it in the description box. And Moshe's book, Collie Wobbles, which is for how to negotiate when negotiating makes you nervous. Thank you so much, you guys. So that's it today. Please go follow the guests on LinkedIn, and I will see you guys next week.
Thank you so much, Dan, for inviting us.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always my pleasure. Thank you so much. So let me close the show.